Today, we're diving into one very unusual bank heist that took place in Hulun City, Heilongjiang Province, China. And trust me, this isn't your run-of-the-mill robbery. The mastermind was a 55-year-old late bloomer who decided it was high time to shake things up. His name, Song Kunjian. Once the head honcho of the bank's internal security, he meticulously plotted for 6 years to rob the very vault of the bank he worked for, dreaming of one big score to fund a swanky, luxurious retirement. But, as life would have it, his grand plan hit an unexpected and hilariously premature roadblock. Back in his younger days, thanks to a diet as unpredictable as a reality TV plot, Song Kunjian developed chronic stomach problems. He'd usually just pop a pill to ease the pain, until March 2000, when he finally decided his gut had enough and took off to Harbin for some serious treatment. It turned out he was diagnosed with early-stage stomach cancer. After a surgery that took a bite out of his stomach and his wallet, he ended up in the hospital for over a month, racking up bills of more than 7,000 yuan. Not exactly a bargain back in the day. After being discharged, Song strutted back to work clutching his receipts, expecting a full refund. Instead, the bank president delivered the bad news in his best no-nonsense tone. Company policy only allowed for half reimbursement. Ouch. Talk about a punchline no one wanted. Fuming, Song fired back, "This illness is work-induced. It's practically an occupational injury. You should be covering the entire bill." One might say his stomach wasn't just upset about the food, it was fed up with overtime too. But the bank president was as unyielding as a cement wall. Rules are rules. No one's above them, and there's no room for negotiation. Even when facing a case of indigestion gone wild, that was the last straw. Song lost it and launched into a full-blown tirade. "You lowlifes, you spend your days out feasting and living it up, yet my meager medical bill isn't even enough for one of your fancy dinners." He wasn't mincing words. His frustration was as spicy as his once-troubled stomach. While Song's rant had a nugget of truth, it was really a case of comparing apples to oranges. The bank's policies were set in stone, no matter how absurd they might seem in hindsight. After enduring the verbal onslaught, the bank president wasn't about to let things slide. In his own turf, he made it crystal clear. He wasn't going to let Song get away with that kind of outburst. No way, no how. Not long after, the bank president, citing that Song was no longer cut out for the job, slapped his name onto the next downsize list. When Song caught wind of it, he was absolutely livid. "Just because I used to run security doesn't mean I can't put you in your place," he fumed. "You've really pushed me over the edge. I'll make sure you pay dearly." He pulled an all-nighter and finally hatched the perfect revenge scheme. The very next day at work, everyone noticed that Song had transformed into a model employee. Clutching a little notebook, he darted from office to office, inspecting security with laser focus. His colleagues assumed he was just scrambling to save his job, putting on a show in hopes that the boss might cut him some slack. But little did anyone know, this was merely the opening act of Song's master revenge plan. He was on a mission to collect every key in the bank. Under the guise of a routine security check, Song covertly pulled out his secret stash of modeling clay hidden in his notebook. Seizing the moment when no one was looking, he pressed the clay onto the locks to create perfect replicas of the keys. Before long, Song had acquired copies of every key in the bank, from ordinary office doors all the way to the safe deposit boxes. After pulling off his covert key caper, Song boldly marched up to the bank president and handed in his resignation. "If I'm going to get fired eventually, I might as well do it on my own terms, he thought. In what felt like the blink of an eye, 6 months later, on Friday, November 10th, 2000, the bank scheduled an all-staff internal meeting. Hearing the news, Song figured his moment had arrived. Quietly slipping back into the bank, he used his previously crafted keys to unlock the gun vault. Inside a safe, he filched a Type 77 pistol and snatched 20 rounds of ammunition. After making his escape, Song ambled along the railway tracks until he reached a deserted spot. There, he dug a sizable pit, wrapped the stolen gun and bullets in a plastic bag, buried them, and left a secret marker known only to him before heading home. Barely 10 days later, the bank received word that higher-ups were coming for an inspection. An internal audit soon revealed that a handgun was missing. The current head of security had no choice but to report the loss, and the bank promptly called the police. The incident quickly escalated, drawing the attention of the Provincial Public Security Department, which set up a special task force to investigate. The task force zeroed in on two prime suspects, the current head of security and none other than former Chief Song Kunjian. The new security chief naturally had no inkling of any wrongdoing. But when questioned, Song cheekily insisted, "I don't know anything. I resigned properly, with all the proper handovers. How is the missing gun my problem? If you suspect me, then show me some evidence. Otherwise, I'm walking. Besides, my health isn't exactly in top shape." Simply couldn't locate the missing firearm. In the end, they had no choice but to chalk it up as an unsolved case, for now. But the fallout didn't stop there. The bank president couldn't escape blame. Higher-ups, citing massive managerial oversights, issued him a stern warning and forced him into early retirement. Talk about a plot twist. News of this reached Song in no time, and he couldn't help but feel smug. "So you thought you could keep me down, huh? Now you see what I'm really capable of," he mused with a wicked grin. The new bank president wasted no time stepping into his role, and Song Kunjian was the first to pay him a visit with a hearty complaint. "Boss, I've devoted most of my life to this bank, only to be sidelined by the old guard. Everyone at work knows it. I just can't bear to leave this place. When new management comes in, it's customary to tear down the previous regime, especially when the former boss has made colossal mistakes. During Song's tenure, there wasn't a single security hiccup, and his reputation among colleagues was stellar. Booting him out, that reeked of pure personal vendetta. Once the issues were pointed out, quick fixes were in order. With the new president's backing, Song was promptly welcomed back, this time as the administrator of the bank's guest house. Back at work, Song's spirits soared. Having bested his former boss in a verbal showdown, he felt like he'd scored a total victory. A few months later, Song strolled over to his secret gun stash, retrieved his pistol, and started toying with it. It seemed this old-timer was already cooking up round two. In his statement, Song declared, "I pulled off taking down the old boss in style. Working as a guest house manager is a total waste of my talents. Now that I've got a gun in hand, with my brilliant mind, I can definitely pull off something huge. Once a wild idea takes hold, it's hard to rein it in." Song figured that if his gun theft were uncovered, he'd be behind bars anyway, so why not go all in? After all, he wasn't exactly a spring chicken, and life's too short not to take a risk. With his mind made up, Song immediately set his sights on the bank's vault. If he pulled this off, he'd never have to worry about a thing for the rest of his days. After some careful reconnaissance, Song determined that the vault was, in theory, doable, but it would be one heck of a challenge. First up, The vault door wasn't just locked with a key, it also sported a digital code. In short, the only way in was by brute force. On top of that, 3 guards kept nightly watch over the vault. To go in with a bang, those guys had to be taken care of beforehand. And then there was the headache-inducing issue of covering his tracks. Since virtually every vault heist involves an insider, the cops would definitely start their search within the bank, making a clean getaway nearly impossible. For a full 5 years, Song meticulously schemed every detail of his plan until he finally nailed down what he believed was the perfect blueprint for the heist. Step 1. Use an oxygen torch to slice through the vault door. The trick was to purchase the cutting machine from out of town and to plan well in advance, giving the cops plenty of time to miss the connection. Step 2. Devise a foolproof plan to quietly eliminate the 3 guards on duty with a gun. Every detail had to be executed perfectly. Any noisy misstep, and the whole plan would blow up in his face. Step 3. After taking out the guards, ensure their bodies vanish to create the illusion of an inside job gone awry. A distraction that would divert the police's attention entirely onto them. Song planned to dismember the bodies right on the spot, bag them up, and then bury them near the bank. After all, given his age and less than stellar health, trekking too far would only get him caught. But burying the bodies too close to the bank posed its own risk. Since the police would undoubtedly start their search from the bank, a nearby burial site was a dangerously obvious choice. This meant the burial spot had to be super inconspicuous. So Song ended up choosing the bank's plumbing drain, yes, the water heating duct, as his secret burial ground. After ticking off all those logistical puzzles, there was one thornier issue left: how to dismember the bodies without leaving a trace. Dismembering 3 grown adults wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Using knives or axes would have taken forever. So, Song decided to lay down heaps of plastic sheeting on the floor and then use an electric saw, ensuring not a drop of blood was left behind. Then came the bank's surveillance dilemma. By this time, the bank was armed with cameras, so Song's master plan was to simply haul off the main monitoring unit and bury it alongside the bodies. Talk about killing 2 birds with 1 stone. To completely wash his hands of suspicion, Song needed to create a rock-solid alibi, essentially proving to the cops that he didn't even have the time to commit the crime. After all, a family alibi isn't exactly convincing. The best bet was to have an outsider vouch for his absence at the bank during the incident. Song's ingenious plan: claim he was in Harbin for medical treatment and even get admitted. Then, on one carefully chosen night during his stay, he'd hop on a train back to the bank, complete his dastardly deeds, and immediately return to his hospital bed, pulling off the perfect nobody saw a thing act. With the entire scheme mapped out, Song was positively thrilled. He believed his plan was as flawless as they come, and all that was left was to storm the vault and grab the cash. Once every detail of the plan was finalized, Song got down to business. First order of business: secure a cutting machine. In early June 2004, while on a business trip to Harbin, Song seized the opportunity to drop 1,000 yuan and snag himself a DC welding machine. The science behind it wasn't rocket science at all. Pair a welding machine with an oxygen tank, and you've got a basic cutting tool ready to slice through just about anything. After lugging everything back, Song initially hid his new gear under his office bed, but feeling the risk was too high, about a month later, he used a water delivery run for the credit department as cover to sneak the welding machine up to a storage room on the bank's 3rd floor. 2 months later, he added an electric saw to his collection and naturally stashed it in a quiet corner of that same storage room. Over the following period, Song amassed a veritable arsenal of tools: hammers, axes, screwdrivers, crowbars, whatever he thought might come in handy. He hid them in every nook and cranny of the bank. When the police finally investigated, they ended up hauling out a truckload of these contraptions. By May 2005, with warmer weather setting in and the heating season over, it was time for routine maintenance on the heating pipes. Naturally, Song slipped into the bank's heating duct drainage system to begin his covert operation. Since this grimy area was rarely visited, after venturing a few dozen meters in, Song decided the distance was just right. Over the next 3 days, he dug a 3-meter deep pit, set it up with a cover, and even stashed a shovel there for good measure. In July of that same year, Song gradually stockpiled 2 big bundles of plastic bags, hiding them behind several radiators, ready for hauling around dismembered body parts when needed. Come August, he purchased a massive roll of plastic sheeting, cut it into small pieces, and stashed them in the bank's restrooms, prepped as a slick surface for his dismemberment work. With every tool and tactic in place, the next step was choosing the perfect moment. Ever patient, Song waited for that golden opportunity. Then, in October 2005, his chance finally arrived. With the bank president on the verge of leaving due to a work reshuffle and the old guard gone while the new one hadn't yet arrived, the bank's management slackened, and Song saw it as a godsend opportunity to strike. In the days that followed, Song went around lamenting, "My stomach is acting up again. It's unbearable. I'm practically about to have my stomach chopped off. I'll need to hit the hospital soon." With the drama perfectly set, Song naturally made his way to Harbin for treatment. Once at the hospital, regardless of the diagnosis, he insisted his stomach hurt so badly that he absolutely needed to be admitted. After spending over 10 days in the hospital and feeling confident it was safe, Song set his heist for a Saturday, traditionally the day when the bank was at its emptiest and security was off its game. So, on that Saturday afternoon, Song quietly slipped out of his hospital room, bought a train ticket at the station, and by 7 p.m. that night, he was back in Hulun City. First, he headed to his hidden gun stash to retrieve his pistol. And then, under the cover of darkness, he made a beeline for the industrial and commercial bank. Along the way, Song was practically buzzing with excitement. His target wasn't astronomical. 3 million was plenty. After all, he'd done the math. With his not-so-robust physique, 3 million was his carrying capacity. Anything more, and he'd be outmatched by his own body. Strutting up to the bank with unshakable confidence, Song reached the front door only to freeze in disbelief. What the heck? Why are all the lights blazing inside, he wondered. Talk about a mood killer. As if his luck couldn't get any worse, the bank was in a mad rush to settle the Hulun City Education Fund that very day. All the staff were pulling an all-nighter, hustling non-stop. Not exactly the quiet heist environment Song had envisioned. Completely baffled and convinced that his secret was blown, Song hightailed it out of the bank and sprinted back to Harbin without a second thought. For several nerve-wracking days, Song lay in his hospital bed, anxiously watching the clock. After some subtle inquiries, he finally learned that he'd simply overreacted. His paranoia had gotten the better of him. Realizing that lingering in Harbin too long could raise eyebrows, Song decided to pack up and head back to Hulun City, patiently biding his time for the next big break. Even though Song wasn't in a hurry, a problem reared its head. He'd already used his hospital excuse. Using it again in quick succession might look fishy, so he had to cook up a brand new alibi. After over a month of brainstorming, Song devised a wild new plan. After taking care of business at the bank, he dashed to a nearby bathhouse, rent a room, and even hire a masseuse. Once she finished her service, he'd shut the door, slip out the window, and head back to the bank to wrap up the rest of his devious scheme. After finishing the remaining steps, he'd return to the bathhouse, climbing back in through the window, and when dawn broke, swagger out the front. Try to pin me down, he'd think, since the bathhouse staff would vouch for his alibi. Song had scoped things out in advance and picked room 202 or 203, the ones with a little boiler room beneath. Climbing out of the window here meant he could easily hit the roof and descend to the ground with minimal fuss. Once every detail was meticulously planned, Song set the date, January 15th, 2006. It had been 6 long years since his first gun theft, and he was ready to level up his game. January 14th, 2006, a Saturday, was initially Song's planned day of action. However, after a day of covert surveillance from the guest house opposite the bank, he noticed that all 3 security guards were together. Even with his trusty pistol, he wasn't 100% sure he could take them all out at once. Having never actually killed anyone before, and given his less-than-stellar health, Song knew he had to wait until the guards were separated. Timing, he realized, was absolutely critical. Having never actually killed anyone before, and given his less-than-stellar health, Song knew he had to wait until the guards were separated. Timing, he realized, was absolutely critical. He recognized them immediately, one named Shu, the other Lu. They were clearly off to have dinner, leaving only one guard with the surname Li on duty at the bank. Bank policy required at least 2 guards on duty at all times, but in practice, they barely followed the rule. This lax attitude had never caused any trouble, until now. Sensing his moment, Song pounced on the opportunity. Once he saw the 2 guards drift away, he quickly grabbed his pistol and retrieved his pre-prepared pork trotters, nonchalantly strutting toward the bank. To lull the guards into a false sense of security, Song had, for nearly 2 years, made a habit of visiting the vault security room on weekends, armed with tasty treats to cozy up with the security staff. When Song reached the security room, he knocked on the door. Li, assuming the other 2 guards had returned from dinner, bellowed, "Weren't you 2 off for dinner?" as he went over and swung the door open. Upon opening the door and seeing Song, Li wasn't the least bit surprised. "Uncle Song, what brings you here?" he asked, ushering him inside. With a slight smile, Song replied, "I had too many pork trotters for lunch at home, so I brought you some. Get in here and have a bite. They're still piping hot." But while Li was busy gnawing on the trotters, Song, ever the calm assassin, casually circled behind him. Pulling a pistol from his coat, he aimed squarely at Li's head and pulled the trigger. The shot brought Li down immediately. Worried he might not be completely out, Song knelt down and fired a second bullet into Li's heart, making sure the job was done for good. After dragging Li's body into a corner, Song grabbed a mop and wiped away every trace of blood. Then he slipped into the hallway outside and peered through the window by the restroom, eyes fixed on his next target's return. Around 5:20 p.m., Shu appeared within Song's line of sight. On spotting him, Song quickly ducked into the restroom to bide his time, timing it just right. As Shu ambled past the restroom door, Song emerged as if by chance and greeted him with a casual, "Hey there, little Shu." Shu, upon recognizing Song, cheerfully replied, "Uncle Song, what brings you here?" Sticking to his well-worn script, Song said, "I've got some cooked food, big old pork trotters. Come over and grab a bite." and if it runs out, I'll fix you up with more. While the two strolled and chatted toward the security office, Shu reached the door and knocked. Seizing the moment, Song casually pulled his pistol from behind, fired a clean shot to the back of Shu's head, knocking him flat, and then added a second bullet right to his forehead. Song then dragged Shu's body into the security office, wiped the floor spotless, and sat down calmly inside, waiting for the final person to return. Feeling supremely confident and delighted with how well guns work, Song was sure that dispatching those two guys was a piece of cake. He was convinced this operation would be a total success. Around 6:05 p.m., the last guard, Mr. Liu, returned, but instead of heading to the security room, he went straight to the second-floor break room. Hearing the sound, Song calmly tucked his pistol away, strolled up to the second floor, and knocked on the break room door with deliberate ease. Having already taken out two men, Song wasn't about to beat around the bush this time. He whipped out his pistol and fired a shot straight at Liu. At that moment, Song was the only living soul left in the entire bank building, and it was clear no one else was coming. Next, the workload ramped up. Song first locked the bank's back door from the inside, then went to the surveillance room, pulled out the power, disassembled the main system, and tossed it downstairs, planning to bury it along with the bodies at the very end. Then he retrieved his stash of hidden tools, slipped into an extra-large pair of soft-soled cloth shoes, and donned a light green trench coat, his way of keeping the blood off him during the dismemberment process. After that, he pulled out a huge black cloth and hung it over the security office window, completely blocking any view from the outside of what was happening inside. With all set, Song followed his plan to the letter and headed straight for the bathhouse. He intended to stay there until after midnight, both to forge a solid alibi and to be ready to abort his operation instantly if any guard's family member unexpectedly showed up. Having factored in every conceivable detail, a confident Song finally walked into the public bathhouse at around 9:20 p.m. He strode up to the front desk and said to the attendant, "Give me a room on the second floor, room 202. The attendant smiled and replied, "All right, sir, just a moment while I check for you." A few seconds later, the attendant looked up and said, "Sorry, room 202 is already occupied." Song's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly regained his composure and calmly said, "Then room 203. But as fate would have it, the attendant found that room 203 was also booked. It being the weekend and the bathhouse booming, the only vacancy was on the 5th floor. After hearing this, Song's plans hit a snag. Of all things, he hadn't accounted for a hiccup in this very step, with no other choice. After all, he'd already killed two. Song grudgingly opted for rooms 202. Once inside, and after closing the door, a jittery Song rushed to the window. He saw the familiar boiler room below, but being on the 5th floor now, finding an exit became a real headache. Exiting through the main door would surely alert the staff, ruining the whole ruse. After much deliberation, Song resolved that his only option was to risk an escape. Via the window, his plan was to tie together the curtains, sheets, and blankets to fashion a rope to climb down the window. The catch? Getting down would be easy, but climbing back up later would be a nightmare. With no better idea, he decided to risk it now and figure out the return trip later. Once he made up his mind, Song called over the attendant and specifically requested massage therapist number 22, a lady he'd used a few times before and knew well, so that if any investigation arose, she could vouch for him. The therapist arrived promptly. As soon as she entered the room, she greeted him with a beaming smile. Hey, big guy, back for another round? What massage would you like today? Song waved his hand dismissively and replied, I'm a bit tired today. Just give me a foot massage. That'll do. Half an hour later, after the therapist finished her session and left, Song took a short break. Around 11:30, he jumped up and hastily tied together the sheets, blankets, and duvet cover, anchoring one end to the radiator inside and flinging the other end out the window. Using the makeshift rope, Song clambered out the window and painstakingly rappelled down inch by inch, using every bit of strength he had, until he finally reached the roof of the boiler room on the second floor. But when luck turns sour, mishaps keep coming one after another. In the boiler room, the guy who usually burns the boilers and sleeps early hadn't slept a wink that night. So when he looked up, he saw a man descending from the fifth floor. Climbing down a building like that in the middle of the night is never a good sign. However, the boiler operator kept quiet, merely watching from a distance. Once Song had disappeared, the guy dashed over to the bathhouse to report what he'd seen to the attendant. Oblivious to what had just happened, Song looked around once he landed and assumed all was well. Without missing a beat, he sprinted back to the bank. Despite a few hiccups, nothing catastrophic had occurred. As the saying goes, the best things take time. With everything seemingly under control, he planned to spend 2 hours dismembering the bodies and another 2 hours prying open the vault door, aiming to secure his 3 million before 5 a.m. To his utter dismay, a fatal hiccup occurred. His electric saw, essential for the dismemberment, was nowhere to be found. Song even wondered if he'd simply forgotten where he stashed it. After all, he had hidden so many items over the years and even moved them around occasionally. This tool was too crucial. Without the electric saw, he couldn't efficiently dismember the bodies. In a state of near hysteria, Song searched high and low, upstairs and downstairs, for what felt like an eternity. But it was nowhere to be found. Eventually, Song had no choice but to give up on the saw. Not willing to waste any more time, he resolved to resort to using a knife for the gruesome task. In truth, at that moment, if Song had changed his mind and abandoned the bodies to rush to the vault, time would have still been on his side, but that would have thrown his entire plan into chaos. Determined to make sure the bodies disappeared and clear his own name, he reluctantly pressed on with the knife dismemberment. When luck isn't on your side, nothing goes smoothly. In Song's original plan, the knife was hardly meant to be the star. It was just a backup tool he'd grabbed on a whim. The clunker wasn't sharp at all, and lacking any real dismemberment experience, the entire process dragged on excruciatingly slowly. After enormous effort, Song finally managed to dismember 2 bodies. But when he checked the time, he was utterly flabbergasted. It was already 6:10 a.m., and in just 1 more hour, his colleagues would be arriving for work. Heading to the vault for the next step was now impossible in time. His only option was to quickly tidy up the scene and reduce any trace of danger as best he could. But just as Song was hauling the bundled body parts to the entrance of the plumbing drain, yet another stroke of bad luck struck. When he originally dug the pit, it was May, but now it was January, right in the midst of the heating season. The drain was sealed tight, with hardly any oxygen inside. Just a few steps in, Song began to struggle for air. If he didn't get out soon, he'd collapse. At that point, Song completely broke down. He hastily changed his plan, shoving the body parts into the drain and giving them a sloppy cover, doing the best he could under the circumstances. The body in the bank that he hadn't managed to dismember in time, he had to crudely shove it under a bed. There was simply no time for finesse. Then came the surveillance system, a must-dispose item, or else all his previous work would be for nothing. With time running out, Song had no choice but to haphazardly stuff the main unit into a storage room on the third floor. After finishing these tasks, it was exactly 7 a.m. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. In a panic, Song quickly tossed his pistol into an iron cabinet in the storage room and bolted up to the fifth-floor roof. According to his plan, he was supposed to jump from the bank's rooftop to the adjacent residential building's roof, then down to the ground from there. Surprisingly, that part went off without a hitch. Song made it to the ground smoothly and then dashed back to the bathhouse in record time. By then, it was roughly 7:30 a.m. When Song arrived at the back of the bathhouse. He discovered that the rope he'd made from the sheets had already been taken away, making a return via the window impossible. With no other choice, Song reluctantly entered the bathhouse through the main door, planning to retreat to his room and pretend to spend the entire night there. But barely had he stepped inside when the attendant immediately recognized him, asking, "When did you go out?" Song stammered and couldn't explain himself, and the attendant cut him off. "Fine, say you went out. Why on earth did you have to use the window? You ruined our sheets and duvet covers." Song quickly tried to deny it. "I didn't do that. I think you've got the wrong idea." But the attendant wasn't having it. "Oh, come on now. You really expect us to believe that? The boiler room guy downstairs saw everything. We even went into your room and collected the items, and you still won't admit it." At this point, Song was completely speechless. He couldn't spin another tale. In the end, he was forced to fork over 1,000 yuan as compensation, effectively sweeping the incident under the rug, at least for now. Song's dream of scoring 3 million had gone down the drain. Not only did he end up killing 3 people for nothing, but he also lost a pretty penny in the process. At this point, the case was riddled with holes. It wouldn't have been long before the police zeroed in on Song. Yet he remained unconvinced, stubbornly believing that the cops would never suspect him. Around 9 a.m. that morning, Song swaggered out of the bathhouse and strutted off to work. Meanwhile, a whole bunch of police had already converged at the scene, turning it into quite the lively spectacle. At 3:35 p.m., the bank's surveillance system was recovered, but it had been smashed beyond repair. The police quickly dispatched technicians to fix it. By 8 p.m., the pistol was found, and in an iron cabinet within a storage room, the cutting machine was also discovered. At 1:30 a.m. the next day, even the burial site of the dismembered remains was uncovered. At 6 a.m. the following day, once the surveillance hard drive was repaired, the footage revealed every moment of Song's murderous rampage. On March 26, 2008, after approval by the Supreme People's Court, Song was executed by firing squad, putting an end to the life of a 57-year-old man. Looking back at Song's entire scheme, one must admit that his plan was indeed meticulously crafted, and dedicating 5 to 6 years solely to this endeavor demonstrated a remarkable level of determination and perseverance. However, from another perspective, his over-preparation made the process excessively complicated, which in turn increased the number of potential failure points. If even one step went awry, the whole plan could collapse.